Hey everybody, David Chatham with Angel Oak Creative. Welcome to our nonprofit State of Minds podcast. This is our latest episode, and we are so excited to be speaking with Jeanne Tedrow, the president and CEO of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you so much, David. It's really a privilege to be here with you today.
Well, thank you. You all are an important part of the nonprofit sector, and this series wouldn't be complete without having you and the center represented. So thank you for willing to have this conversation and just kind of let us pick your brain a little bit and learn a little bit about you, a little bit about the work that the center does, and maybe how we can just help to make North Carolina a stronger state of nonprofits, which is what Angel Oak is really talking about this year. And we're using this as one of the resources to have those conversations. We believe, and would love to get your thoughts on this as we get into it, but we believe that nonprofits can change the world. And for us, the world starts here in North Carolina. So, we really want to see our nonprofits continue to thrive, and we want to see the nonprofit sector thrive. So thank you for all you do to make that happen.
Thank you.
Well, good. Well, I know we were talking beforehand, and you've had a little bit of a journey in the nonprofit sector, and some milestones and some things. So, would love to just have you tell us a little bit about how you came to be in the nonprofit world.
Well, it's interesting and a time. It's an interesting time for you to be asking me this question, because I have truly been reflecting on my past 48 plus, the 48 years, which is hard to believe, of working in the nonprofit sector. And as I shared with you just before we began this, that by now, the news of my retirement from the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits will have been made public.
Congratulations.
And thank you so much. And even as I say that, it is quite bittersweet. I have worked with so many different people over these many years, and working at the Center for Nonprofits has been just truly a privilege. The team there just cares so deeply about the nonprofit sector, and they're just so good at what they do. They sometimes make me look good, and I appreciate that.
Well, that's not hard to do. So
well, I appreciate that too. So when I think about being here at the center, I really believe that the role I play it is the culmination, if you will, the culmination of my work in the nonprofit sector over really a span of about 50 years.
Wow.
I could say that I began when I was 12, but
I was about to say, you probably started in like middle school, right?
Yeah, actually I did. And so that was really the beginning of my work in the nonprofit sector. And it really helps me relate to people who develop the passion and the care of their community over a lifetime. I really did begin when I was 12, and my first volunteer job was working in a camp for special needs adults, children rather, not special adults, special needs kids. And my brother Walter was one of the campers, and so I probably got it pretty honestly early on within a family that truly believed in taking care of others. And I volunteered in that camp till I could get a job, paying job. So till I was 16. So 4 consecutive summers working as a volunteer camp counselor. And without, giving the whole, I went from this point to this point to this point. I did work my way through college. And while I was working my way through college, I was working for a nonprofit as a group home counselor, and did that really for those 4 years, and continued on with that nonprofit, becoming a director of a program, and then becoming a director of multi-sites, and then becoming a leader manager in that nonprofit. And so by the time I was 30, I had already put in a fair amount of years working in the nonprofit sector. And that really brought me to North Carolina, because I became very, very interested in that intersection of philanthropy, public policy, and community care. And what is that about? And so I applied to Duke, and they accepted me, and I came down in April and saw the beautiful spring flowers as compared to the Boston still winter April. And because of philanthropy, I was able to better afford going to Duke. I became a Z. Smith Reynolds Fellow. As a result of that, I met the philanthropic community, if you will, of North Carolina through the eyes of Z. Smith Reynolds. The great Tom Lambeth was one of my program officers. Yeah. And the only commitment they asked was, tell us what your experience was, and consider working on behalf of our communities in North Carolina when you finish your degree. So wow. I have to say, I always say, I answered that question pretty well. I've committed 40 years of my adult life to doing things in the community that I hope have had an impact and helped improve the community. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was just curious, what in that 40 years that you've seen, and I know the list could be so long, but what are 2 or 3 things that you've seen that have evolved over that time that are, because I mean, you have a perspective that not everybody gets. A lot of people enter nonprofit work, as a second career, or maybe they enter it for a time and then go into private sector or vice versa. So what are some of the things that on the big picture, or maybe even specific to North Carolina, that you've seen evolve that maybe are of note? I know I didn't prep you for that question, so that's out of there.
That's okay. I think, it's a sort of a both and. In many ways, the nonprofit sector has not fully come into its own in terms of understanding its own value to the community.
Yeah.
And as I think about that, and even in my role at the center, I think, have I done enough to really elevate the conversation in the public domain about the value of nonprofits? And at the same time, I think that there's really no one whose life isn't touched by a nonprofit in one form or fashion. And so in many ways, it has evolved to become a more, we now have, what am I trying to say? We now have university and college programs that tell people how to manage a nonprofit, right? I mean, 30, 40 years ago, you didn't have nonprofit management anywhere, right? And so in many ways, it has become professionalized, and there are some really good things about that. And so I don't know if I'm 100% answering your question.
No, that's great. Yeah.
But I think that there's, even as it has become a recognized professional career, there are real opportunities to understand the economic value of the nonprofit community. In North Carolina, we bring in $46 billion to our economy. About 1 in 10 jobs is held by someone in the nonprofit sector.
That's incredible.
It is incredible.
Yeah.
And there's really, really nothing that could be done to close the gap between what government can do and what the private for-profit sector can do without the nonprofit sector. We are the glue. I also, so in answer to your question, I think we've evolved in many ways, in positive ways. We've become stronger professionally. And I think we're moving toward a better relationship in the macro sense, a better relationship with philanthropy.
Yeah.
And I can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. Yeah, what's that observation of, what's that mean?
Well, we're not 100% where I think we should be in terms of being thought partners. You know, nonprofit executives are perennial beggars, and that's tiresome as a profession.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you always feel like you're on the
probably
asking.
one of the number one reasons for burnout in the sector, right?
Thank
is
you.
that constant,
Right.
you know, the necessity to raise funds, right?
Right. Right. And so the trend that I have felt, especially through COVID, is philanthropy, talking more with nonprofits as thought partners on here's a challenge we have in our community. What are we going to do together to really address this need? And rather than me as the executive director of XYZ organization just going to the funder and saying, can we please have some money so we can help people who are housing insecure?
Right.
The funders, I think, are saying, gee, I think some of these nonprofits might understand what's going on in the community. Why don't we ask them what they need?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that's so, yeah, you know, many of the clients we work with, we talk about them developing their position as thought leaders, right? That's an important part of establishing themselves as not only a credible organization, but also an organization that has a bigger impact and creates you know, that. So I know and I want to make sure you know, talk about the center and your work, because it is so important in this process of building up stronger nonprofit sector, right? But yeah, thank you. Those are all, I appreciate that observation. And you know, what we're continuing to see with our nonprofits is that, yes, when they're able to take some ownership of a cause or an issue beyond just doing the footwork, but also contributing to the thought work of how do we solve this problem. I've always thought that thinking of nonprofits as solutions providers, right? That's their role. It's not just that and again, I don't minimize any of this, but it's not that they're handing out a sandwich or building a house, but they're creating solutions about how do we solve some of these systemic issues in a way that doesn't require us to exist anymore. I mean, that's, you know, that would ultimately be the win, right? That if we were able to reach a place where, you know, a Habitat for Humanity or a food bank isn't necessary, that's when we're ultimately going to be considered successful, you know?
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because it is that perennial, you know, when nonprofits should be always working themselves out of a job. Really? I mean, really?
Right.
And what is so interesting to me about that is that we do every single day.
Right.
When I think back on my work at Passage Home, right? A community-based organization that really addressed intergenerational poverty, affordable housing, yada, 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 right? All of those things. And people ask me, are you really working your way out of a job? And I think to myself, then, I thought to myself then, and I still believe this, that every single time we help a family become housed, we are no longer their sustainer.
Right, exactly.
They have become independent and they no longer need the nonprofit. And so in that moment of time, we have absolutely done what we set out to do, which is to no longer be necessary. Our job is over with that family. And you compound
that's a great perspective. Yeah.
Right. So you compound that by what, 1,000 people a year that you help.
Right.
And that first 1,000 people or families that Passage Home helped in 1991.
Right.
I know that so many of those families, the mothers, the single mothers, the homeless, the mothers who are homeless, have raised their children have gone on to college, they've become homeowners, business owners. Absolutely, we worked our way out of a job.
That's right.
And I think when we ask that question or we create that scenario, the reality is nonprofits have to be part of the infrastructure of any community in order for that community to thrive.
Yeah.
And so if we were really taking ourselves out of the equation, the community could not survive.
Right.
Right. And so
Right.
it's really important for funders to say, are you still working with the same family? And have they become dependent? Are you ever going to let that family go?
Right.
And that's a more appropriate question to me than asking,
Are you putting yourself out of a job? Right.
are you trying to get yourself
like
out
that.
of a job? Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think people don't always look at it that way. And so I think it's important because when I was working with families directly, and I think this is true of most community care workers, is they know that at a certain point in time, if I'm doing more of the job of becoming of helping somebody become self-sustaining than that person is doing themselves, then I'm not really doing my job.
Right.
Right. And so nonprofit executives, workers, they understand how to interact and intervene in the community in ways that are healthy.
Yeah.
For both the individual they're trying to help and for the organization. And I think to your question earlier about, what have I seen evolve? I think we haven't gone far enough in understanding that tension in a community, that we couldn't survive without the nonprofit, and that nonprofits are set up, organized to help people become independent, not dependent on the organization.
Yeah, that's so true. And a healthy nonprofit, right? An effective nonprofit has that mission in mind.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right.
Well, so thank you for all that. Tell us the role of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits for people who may not be aware of it. What role does it play within the sector, the nonprofit sector in our state? You are the de facto agency for nonprofits and advocacy and support and all of that. But talk about what that looks like and what role you play.
Thank you for that. The nonprofit sector in North Carolina, it is a big tent, right? We have members and sustainers that are private nonprofit universities, hospitals, healthcare systems, and we have grassroots organizations. So I would say that depending on which nonprofit you are, you will use a different bundle of services from the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. Right. I like to say that we are because people understand this concept almost intuitively, a chamber of commerce, right? Yeah. And so we are, for nonprofits, the chamber of commerce. We offer member benefits. We offer professional development. We are advocates. We are lobbyists for legislation that influences the policies that affect nonprofits. We provide member benefits by way of services, retirement planning, insurance planning, technology, all of those kinds of things. And the Center for Nonprofits is organized by our mission, which is to connect, educate, and advocate for all nonprofits. And we do that through the various programs and services, which I'm happy to talk about if you would like me to.
Yeah, give us an example of maybe where you all have, been impactful in helping the sector, maybe in the last few years. We had COVID, and I know you all were, instrumental in trying to help equip nonprofits to get through that time period because there were so many challenges. So, anyway, but yeah, I'd love to get kind of a practical example of, where you all fit into the
Okay.
ecosystem of nonprofits in North Carolina.
Sure, thank you. Actually, just let's talk about COVID for a second.
Yeah.
When COVID hit, our staff sat together and we went, "What is happening?" And I said, "This is such an opportunity for the Center for Nonprofits to be recognized as relevant, reliable, and timely with the information that we can provide, because nonprofits are going to continue to provide services and they are going to struggle through this entire process. And as we learn more."
Oh, that one, right?
Oh, that was right, right?
Definitely.
And I like to say, that nonprofit workers and nonprofits themselves are the second responders in our community.
Yeah.
Right? The first responders come in, thankfully they come in, they put out the fire, they, help manage whatever is going on in the community in terms of a challenge. Maybe it's a flood, it's a fire, it's a this or it's a that. The nonprofits come in right behind those first responders. Right. And the difference is they stay.
Yeah.
They stay and they continue to help put out help rebuild the community after the fire. And so what I was sharing with my staff as we approached COVID is, this is really a time for the center to understand what our nonprofit sector is going through and make sure that they get the services that they need. And so I think that we absolutely achieved that. I think that the amount of attention and care and consideration that we were able to provide through that time brought us to where we are today. Yeah. And I think that I think nonprofits absolutely came to the Center for Nonprofits for all information that they possibly could about how to handle some of the issues of COVID, those PPP loans and this loan and that loan, and what does that stand for, and who's going to decipher that for us. So we're the interpreters in some respect of all that kind of public policy that comes down the pike. Yeah. And we do really second to none in terms of our advocacy through through David Heinen primarily.
Yeah. And that's so important. I mean, you think about the fact that the work that you all do adds such a megaphone to the sector, and also a very clear presence in the legislature and other places that individual nonprofits in and of themselves just don't have the capacity to represent themselves, right?
That's
so
correct.
You all play such an important role of representing this sector well and effectively in helping to create and pass legislation that encourages and supports and promotes the nonprofit sector. So I don't know that a lot of people either understand or appreciate that, because it is one of those wonky kind of things that most people don't, always get in the weeds about. So we appreciate that work. And is there anything right now that's going on that the sector should be aware of? I don't know if there's any legislation or any activity that's going on like that you think would be helpful for people to be aware of, and there may not be.
Well, there's always something. There's always something, right? Right. But I wanted to also, share that the center is a membership organization, and during COVID, we suspended the requirement that nonprofits need to be members in order to receive our policy updates.
Oh, that's great.
And anything related to COVID. So whether you're a member or not, the Center for Nonprofits was churning out information, free, accessible to all. We completed a statewide survey with the Office of State Partnerships to better understand what organizations were going through. And as COVID has officially been closed or finished, we're no longer
Right,
in a
yeah.
COVID era. We decided to continue to provide policy updates without a membership requirement.
Oh, that's great.
Well, what that means is that there's a lot of free riding in the sector. And I
Right.
don't mean that in a negative way, but
Sure.
I do say that when an organization becomes a member of the Center for Nonprofits, their membership helps to provide support for the sector itself. And that's why
Right.
I think, frankly, all charitable 501c3 organizations who really do benefit from the voice of the Center for Nonprofits really need to support us through membership.
Yeah.
And that's an important
Your
thing.
membership is very reasonable too. I mean, from what I recall, you know, it's certainly not a very high barrier to membership. So I would encourage people to look into that. And
I would agree. And what you get in exchange is really
the
phenomenal.
value is great.
Yeah, the value is great.
I'm sure we'll have you repeat this again, but where can people go to become members? Is there a website they can visit?
Sure, they can just go to ncnonprofits.org and there's a become a member tagline, and encourage folks to go to that page and join. I think it's really it's a good way of supporting your own organization by building a stronger voice for the whole sector.
Right.
So I think advocacy is one of the big areas. I think the educate piece of what we do. And we have really developed over the last few years a couple of new and interesting approaches to capacity building.
Yeah.
So we do have our Institute for Nonprofit Management, which is a 6-module series, and we have a waiting list every single time.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's great.
we really can only have about 50 people on a Zoom to make it meaningful. We're always exceeding that.
Wow.
And that is based on our principles and practices, and it's peer learning and it's experiential learning, and it's really efficient for organizations to step in. And the other thing, David, that we've developed, which is really a dream of mine when I came in, was how could nonprofit executives be in the driver's seat to help assess where their organization is in the life cycle of a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And so we worked with UNCW actually, and their
Go Seahawks.
What's that?
I'm a Seahawk. So
well, I'm telling you, they were great. Their computer design class helped us design an online tool for nonprofit assessment.
I don't think I knew that. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It's very cool. So the nonprofit executive can come in, sit in the privacy of their own home or office, figure out where they think their organization is, and then we work with them to offer a coach, advisor, help them develop their work plan, and work with them, coaching them over the next 6 months or so, including helping them think about where can they go for resources to fulfill.
Remind us what that program is called.
CMS, or Center Managed Solutions.
Okay. People can find that on your website as well.
They should be able to find that on our website. And where we're going with this, as a result of bringing nonprofits together through the Institute and other peer learning, is thinking about how we can provide shared back office services like HR services and legal services and the like, because not all nonprofits need a full time of everything, right?
Yeah.
And so we're working on that.
And let us know if
that
we can help in the marketing side. You know, we love.
Yeah.
So
Anything
we can do to contribute to the sector, we would.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate all that Angel Oak does, and you know, I think I was Passage Home was one of Angel Oak's first clients.
You were the first client. So last year, I don't know if you recall, but last year we celebrated our 10th anniversary last year.
Yep.
You all were our first, Passage Home was our first, so we donated $1,000 to Passage Home last year and celebrated with them. So,
Yep.
and then
And I appreciate
we're
that.
actually working with them again this year. So it's come full circle. So
Oh, you are working with them again
we
this year?
are. So yeah, so it's been great. So, and it all started with Caitlin and you and your relationship there. So, well,
Yeah.
Jeanne, thank you for your time. Leave us with one thing that you really want the North Carolina nonprofit sector to know. What is it? What's the one thing that if you had to give some advice or give some direction, or a challenge, what would that be?
Know your value.
That's great.
Know your value. And I think that's internally from the nonprofit itself, and truly for the state of North Carolina to really ponder, to really reflect upon the value of nonprofits in our communities, and really where your heart is, that is where your treasure will be. Where your treasure is where your heart will be.
That's
And
right.
so I think that valuing nonprofits is a very important thing to take away.
Well, you have set the standard for that with 40 plus years of service to the nonprofit sector. So thank you for that. Angel Oak Creative salutes you for all that you've done. And I know we will continue to see you even after your retirement. I know you will still be involved and engaged with it, but hopefully just a little less and enjoying your new grandkid and all of those things. So
thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you so much. Remind people how they can learn more about the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits.
Go to www.ncnonprofits.org.
Great. And I believe you have an upcoming event this year. Your conference is happening again. And just tell us real quick, because I think this will be out before that. So I'm
Right.
confident it will be, just to get people informed about that conference.
Well, plan on the first week of November to be in Winston-Salem.
All right. The heart of North Carolina.
The heart of North Carolina. That's right.
Well, good. Well, yeah, and we are there every year. We're looking forward to it. We've already
Signed up
for our table, and we're excited about it. So
well, I'll look forward to seeing you there and then and before, if possible.
Well, Jeanne, thank you so much again. Thank you all for those who listen. Continue to listen to our our State of Minds, nonprofit State of Minds podcast, and you can learn more about that at our website at angeloakcreative.com. We'd love to have you visit there. So, Jeanne, we look forward to staying in touch, and congratulations on your next journey.
Thank you so much.
All that you do.
Thank you.
Take care now.